Oh, mine?
Yours.
Yeah, I don't spend much time in it these days.
Hello, John.
How are you?
I'm well, thank you. How are you?
Very good. Thanks, Jim.
Good. It looks like perhaps you may be in your residence there, East Greenwich?
No, I'm in the office in
Oh.
Providence.
Okay.
Gina says I'm essential.
And Tony, you're still looking out of this world.
Well, you know, when you have legal counsel like Christian saying that he wants to view from 30,000 feet, I want to take it up a little further.
There you go.
Ben,
Yes.
Ryan, do you see Patricia?
I have not seen her yet.
And then there's Leslie Parker from my office. And my first witness is going to be Carrie Byron.
Ryan, you let me know when you're ready.
Do we want to wait for Patricia?
We do, but when we're all set, then with all of the participants and admittees, just let me know that we're good.
Jim, I got something to show you if we've got a minute. Can you see that?
Oh, yeah. Looks like a fossilized fish head or something there.
Well, what it is an artifact from Tiverton. You see, they got a hole all the way through for an eye, and then you can see the mouth,
Oh, yeah.
right? And it's the size of my hand. Here's another one, if you can see it.
Oh, yeah.
This is about 2 inches big. You see the eye, you see the mouth,
Yeah.
and that's from Little Compton, South Beach. Crazy, huh? There's artifacts all over the place. So COVID, I go walk the beaches.
Well, you can pick up early Native American artifacts.
I probably got 300 or 400.
Yeah.
All
Wow.
kinds. Any rate, just wanted to little levity to get us going, I guess, today.
Thank you for that. I hate to say this, but what about Attorney Wagner?
He's not. I don't see him in.
Yeah,
Okay.
he just called to say that he's having difficulty logging on. He's going to try again. And I sent an email to you, Ryan, as well.
Yes, I received the document.
Hi, John Baynard. It's Beth Noonan. How are you doing?
Hey, Beth, how are you?
Good. Haven't seen you in a while.
It's been a while.
You know, Mr. Cantor retired.
Yes, I do. Yeah, I'm sorry to see. I mean, happy for him, but
Yeah,
I just sorry not seeing him a resource. And
I know. I agree. Yeah.
And yep, when you talk to him, tell him I said hello, will you please?
I will certainly. Yeah, I keep in touch with him and he drops by here occasionally. So
Oh, does he? Good.
yeah. Old habits die hard, I guess. Huh?
Do we want to wait for Mr. Wagner, or do you want to start?
I think you have to wait a bit
Yeah.
here.
I
Okay.
mean, we gave him intervention status, so I think we have to wait for him. Beth, while we're waiting for Dean, do you want to queue up any exhibits through Ryan?
Yes, please. We're just going to today, as a matter of fact, at least the first one will be Exhibit 3, which is the CV of Carrie Byron. I don't anticipate using any other exhibits with her.
Thank you.
Welcome. Okay, are we ready, Ryan?
We are ready.
Okay, great. I'm calling this meeting to order. It's Friday, November 13, 2020. It is 1:15 p.m. This is the second of 3 scheduled meetings of a subcommittee of the Rhode Island Coastal Resources Management Council. We are convened to hear a contested case in CRMC file number 2017-12-086 in the matter of Perry Raso to establish a 3-acre oyster and bay scallop farm using floating and suspended gear in Potter Pond, South Kingstown, Rhode Island. We have our subcommittee members that are all here today. I will do a roll call. When I call your name out, if you could please unmute and indicate that you're here. So starting with Vice Chair Raymond Koya.
Raymond Koya, present.
Patricia Reynolds.
Tricia Reynolds, present.
Don Gomez.
Don Gomez, present.
Vin Murray.
Vin Murray, present.
Okay. Again, Vin Murray is our South Kingstown representative, and myself, Jennifer Cervenka, Chair. From CRMC staff, we have our Executive Director, Jeff Willis, our Deputy Director, Jim Boyd, Tony DeSisto, our Chief Legal Counsel, Dave Butel, who was here all day or all afternoon yesterday, will be joining us, but from 3 to 5. So he will not start with us today. We also have Lisa Turner, our recording secretary, Ryan Moore, our CRMC moderator. Thank you. And we have Lisa Reese, who is our court reporter. I think I have everyone. Ben Getz is our current aquaculture coordinator, and he is on this call, but he's not on the video. He's available for any questions, process questions, regulation questions that may come up. Yesterday, we covered the staff report. We covered the applicant's case with respect to 2 witnesses. I believe there's 3 additional witnesses that the applicant would like to present. And so we'll go through that today if we have time, and I hope we will be able to read the objectors' counsel for presentation of their cases. And that will be followed by public comment that's going to start next Tuesday. Again, there'll probably be overflow of these matters between today and next Tuesday, with the possibility, the likelihood that we'll have to schedule a fourth meeting because the subcommittee itself will have to have a workshop following the public comment so that we can come up with our recommendation to the full council. The meeting before the full council, Mr. Willis, correct me, is that January 27th? I thought it got scheduled.
Correct, Madam Chair. We have tentatively set it up for the second meeting in January.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Willis, any other administrative matters that I may have missed?
Not necessarily, just we did post on our website, both in the calendar section for under each day of the subcommittee hearings, as well as our homepage, why we have moved the public comment section to the Tuesday hearing date. We wanted to let everybody know as soon as possible what we were doing there. And I want to thank staff for staying late last night and emailing everybody that we had on our email contact list for public comment to let them know the same.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Willis. Mr. Moore, do you have a current number of people who've signed up for the public comment portion?
I had 13 sign up yesterday. I'm not sure how many Lisa had already in her list, but 13 were added yesterday.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Turner?
Chair, I have, Madam Chair, I have 50 people so far that have signed up to speak.
And that's
I,
separate from Mr. Moore's list.
We collaborated list last night. Yes.
yes. So there's 50 people so far, which I assume will grow over the weekend.
Okay, and we are accepting public comment to sign up for public comment today, in addition to yesterday, correct?
That is up to you, Madam Chair.
Okay, Mr. Willis, what had we decided on that?
Yes,
Okay.
if anybody wanted to provide public comment, that they can do so during this hearing in the chat box. And then we take their contact information, their name and email, so that we can add it to the list in the order received.
Okay, so if anyone wants to provide public comment, they should register today. We're not taking beyond that over the weekend, correct?
That's correct. We should have that information by the close of today's hearing.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, so I'm going to turn it back over to Ms. Noonan, who is going to present her third witness, I believe.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am in fact presenting my third witness today, and we have 3 witnesses today. So it'll be Doctors Carrie Byron, Dr. Michael Rice, and Dr. Robert Rowe. So I'd like to start with Carrie Byron first. Okay. Carrie, are you up there, doctor?
I am here. Can you hear
Great.
me okay?
We can. You swear the witness?
Would you raise your right hand, please? Do solemnly swear the testimony that you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Please state your name for the record.
My name is Carrie Byron.
Thank you.
All right. Good afternoon, doctor. How are you?
I'm well, thank you.
Good. Dr. Byron, could you please tell this subcommittee of CRMC where you presently are employed?
I am presently employed at the University of New England.
And what's your position there?
I am a faculty member there.
Okay.
I'm an
And what
professor.
Great. What I'd like to do is introduce Exhibit 3. Mr. Moore, if we could put that up on the screen, please. And Dr. Moore, can you describe for the committee your professional, your educational background?
You're speaking to me? Sorry, you
Yes.
said more.
Sorry, Mr. Moore. Sorry, Mr. Moore is going to put up your CV, hopefully, and then, like I said, as we go through that, what I'd like to do is ask if you can give the committee your educational background, please.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I hold a doctorate degree and trained in environmental science and marine science. I'm currently employed at UNE, where I run a research lab on ecosystem ecology in the coastal ocean and application to aquaculture.
And where did you obtain, prior to your PhD, what other degrees do you hold?
I hold both a master's degree in environmental studies and a bachelor's degree.
Okay. And did there come a period where you were at the University of Rhode Island?
I did my doctorate work at the University of Rhode Island, yes.
All right. Can you describe to the committee what your doctorate work was?
Yes, my thesis was working with farmers in Rhode Island in stakeholder engagement. And with them, I designed a food web model of the coastal systems in Rhode Island, including Narragansett Bay and the salt ponds, in order to calculate a carrying capacity for aquaculture in these waters. So this model was informed by the people who work and live and in this place and know these ecosystems quite well. This model was also informed by peer-reviewed published data and by ongoing surveys, environmental surveys, and other data collected. So all of that information brought together to describe that in a model, and then you could use that model to ask questions such as, how much aquaculture can we have in this environment, in this space, without impacting the ecology and the environment, the food web?
Okay. In addition to your dissertation, have you engaged in other publications that are listed on Exhibit 3?
Yes, I'm well published in this area of carrying capacity for aquaculture, and much of my work, in particular, my dissertation work that was done in Rhode Island, is recognized globally around the world. It's some of my most highly cited work.
Great. I'm going to ask this committee to qualify Dr. Byron as an environmental scientist, as she is a professor of marine science.
Tony?
It's going to take a motion, which is in order, by the way.
Yeah, same as last time, right? Okay.
Correct, yeah.
Okay. Can I get a motion to qualify Ms. Byron as an environmental scientist and Ms. Noonan?
A professor of marine, and with a specialty as a professor in marine science.
As
Madam
stated
Chair,
in this
Ray
meeting.
Coy to be recognized.
Yes, Mr. Koya.
Madam Chair, based upon the CV that's presented to us on screen and the representations, I would move to accept her as an expert in the fields as indicated.
Thank you, Mr. Koya. Is there a second to Mr. Koya's motion?
Don Gomez, second, Mr. Koya's motion.
Thank you, Mr. Gomez. Any discussion? Okay, I'm going to do a roll call. Ray Koya,
Ray Coy votes aye.
Patricia Reynolds,
Reynolds votes aye.
Don Gomez,
Don Gomez, aye.
Vin Murray,
Vin Murray, aye.
Jennifer Cervenka, aye. Motion to qualify carries.
Thank you. Dr. Byron, do you know the applicant, Perry Raso?
I do.
And how long have you known him?
About 12 years.
And how did you get to know Mr. Raso?
I first met him while doing my dissertation work at URI, as just described.
Okay. And are you familiar with the application that Mr. Raso has submitted to CRMC for this project?
I am.
And were you watching the proceedings yesterday afternoon of this subcommittee proceeding?
Every minute of them.
Great, thank you. What other materials did you review in preparation for your testimony today?
Well, as an academic, I always turn to the peer review literature first, but I also reviewed the CRMC staff report dated in June and the opposition package to CRMC dated, I believe it was last week.
Okay. And in that staff report, which we've identified as, it has been admitted as Exhibit 17, there's a section where Mr. Butel makes a reference to a 5% rule with the citation after it. Are you familiar with this 5% rule?
I am.
Can you tell us about that, please?
This 5% rule was developed in parallel to my dissertation work that I just described. If anything, it motivated my dissertation work. This 5% rule came out of discussions among multiple users of these systems in Rhode Island. And the goal, as I understand it, was to come to an agreement on how much aquaculture could be developed in these systems, including the salt ponds. And the way that it was agreed on that 5% would be the rule is that 5% was based on a calculation intended to reflect the ecological carrying capacity of the system. However, the information on hand at the time that calculation was made was limited, and prior to my work using the more comprehensive food web model. That calculation was made based on a study done in New Zealand, where that ecosystem in New Zealand is much different than the ecosystem of Rhode Island salt ponds. But it took some calculations from that New Zealand ecosystem and applied them to oyster culture in Rhode Island. One of the witnesses that you'll hear from after me was the one who actually made that calculation, Dr. Rowe. So you feel free to ask him more about it.
We shall.
He's the one who drafted that calculation and suggested 5% as an ecological carrying capacity for aquaculture. And the other stakeholders at that table at that time in that discussion agreed that that should become a rule or a maximum allowable amount of aquaculture in these, both in Narragansett Bay and the salt ponds. And to be clear, the 5% is describing a surface area coverage of the total surface area of any particular water body.
All right, well, let's just back up a little bit. When you talked about carrying capacity, can you explain that and what carrying capacity is and what it means in the context of aquaculture?
Yeah, happy to. Carrying capacity is a term used in ecological science to describe the maximum level of population that an ecosystem can support. So if you were to exceed the carrying capacity, you would expect that population would crash, would diminish, the ecosystem would change in some way. So it's describing how many resources are available to support a certain level of population of an organism. And this definition that ecologists use has been adapted to just specifically for aquaculture. And there's actually a couple different ways in which we can describe carrying capacity for aquaculture. And these definitions are now widely accepted in the literature. And I'm happy to run through that.
Sure, if you can describe the different types of carrying capacity, please.
Absolutely. So the first type of carrying capacity is physical carrying capacity, which simply is the amount of space available to aquaculture. This definition does not consider biology, ecosystems, or even humans of the system, and is therefore irrelevant for our conversation today. Another type of carrying capacity is production carrying capacity, and this is the level of maximum production possible at the farm site, irrespective of where that farm is located or the ecology supporting that farm. Operating at production carrying capacity would impact the ecosystem and is also not what is in question here today. The next type of carrying capacity is ecological carrying capacity, which you've heard me refer to already. This is the level of farm development above which would have unacceptable ecological impacts. This in particular is my area of expertise and is highly relevant to the testimony and conversation regarding Mr. Raso's proposal. And then the fourth type of carrying capacity is social carrying capacity, which is the level of farm development above which would cause unacceptable social impacts. There are many different ways to describe, define, and quantify social carrying capacity. And it's highly dependent on the interests and the values of the humans of that place or that system.
In terms of Potter Pond in Rhode Island, that is one of the salt ponds that you've been discussing initially about in your dissertation, right?
Correct. Potter Pond
Okay.
is included as one of the salt ponds in southern Rhode Island.
Do you know what the ecological carrying capacity of Potter Pond is?
According to my food web model, it is 46% of the surface area of the salt pond, an order of magnitude higher than our 5% rule, in other words.
Okay. And I think you talked about this a little bit. Wanted to know if there's anything else to add about your involvement with the creation of the 5% standard.
I'll just reiterate that 5% rule was calculated and agreed on prior to the completion of the more comprehensive food web model that calculated this much higher ecological carrying capacity.
How would you describe or define a food web modeling?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the food web model describes basically who's eating who and how much in the ecosystem. So it's capturing transfer of energy. Humans are part of this ecosystem, and humans are included in terms of fishing or other extractive exercise activities, such as harvesting of shellfish. And so this model looks at data for all the major species present in the ecosystem and looks at how much of them is there, and there are known rates of production and consumption, respiration, all of our sort of bodily actions that keep us moving and alive, right? You know, from plants up to top predators. You can describe how they're using the energy that they're consuming from their prey, and what that means in terms of then what is available for that next link in the food chain, that next predator above them. So that model captures all of those transfers of energies between species. And what that allows us to do is it gives us a tool, right? It gives us a description of the ecosystem and how it's operating. And it provides us a tool by which we can then ask questions, different scenarios, things that what's really interesting is you can ask these questions right on an ecosystem scale instead of having to rely simply on experiments done in small tanks, for example. It's really hard to do ecosystem-wide experiments. So by using modeling, we can do that in a quantitative way.
Going back to the 5% standard that's set forth now in the CRMC regulations, do you have any understanding of what the initial rationale was for it?
Yes, the initial intent of calculating that 5% rule was an ecological carrying capacity, as I had said earlier.
Okay. And based upon your review of the Mr. Raso's application and your education and experience, what will be the effect of the ecological carrying capacity of Potter Pond from this proposal?
Mr. Raso's proposal will not impact the ecological carrying capacity. The scale at which he's proposing to develop is quite small in comparison to what the pond is able to support. In other words, the addition of this proposal to the pond, the addition of another 3 acres of oyster farming will still be well below the carrying capacity for this pond.
That was the number that you indicated in your dissertation was 46% based upon your modeling, correct?
Correct. Not only my dissertation, but that work has been published and peer reviewed and is highly cited.
In the staff report from CRMC, which is Exhibit 17, it indicated that if this application is approved, Potter Pond would be at 3% of allowable aquaculture activity. Do you have any reason to disagree with this conclusion?
I have no reason to disagree.
Okay. And do you have an opinion as to whether or not that 5% standard is appropriate?
That 5% standard from an ecological perspective is highly conservative.
And would the addition of this farm, again, affect the ecology of Potter Pond?
The addition of this farm will not harm the ecology of Potter Pond.
Okay. Dr. Byron, are you familiar with the CRMC Category B assent requirements?
Yes.
Okay. And based on your experience, your testimony, your review of the materials, do you have an opinion as to whether the addition of this farm will or will not create significant deterioration in the quality of the water of Potter Pond?
I do not expect that this farm will have an impact on the water quality of this pond. It certainly will not harm the water quality of this pond. If anything, it may act to improve the water quality and clarity of this pond.
And if you were watching yesterday, as you were, obviously the focus was, a lot of it was on Seeger Cove. Do you have an opinion as to whether the addition of this farm would create a significant deterioration in the quality of the water of Seeger Cove?
No, my answer is the same. Seagar Cove and Potter Pond are connected. There's water flushing between those areas of the pond. My work describes the whole pond, does not look at particular bays, and I don't expect that there would be any harm to Seagar Cove in particular.
Okay. Do you have an opinion as to whether the proposed aquaculture farm will or will not result in significant impacts on the abundance and diversity of plant and animal life?
Well, that's exactly what my food web model was designed to look at, is the abundance of organisms. The carrying capacity calculated, again, which is an order of magnitude higher than this 5% rule, suggests that organism abundance and diversity will not be harmed at the level of farming that Mr. Raso is proposing.
Do you have an opinion, again, based on your experience and familiarity with the application and the area, as to whether the proposed farm will or will not result in significant impacts to water circulation, including flushing, turbidity, and sedimentation?
Yeah, again, at this small scale of development, I do not see how this farm will impact flushing or sedimentation.
And do you have an opinion as to whether under the alteration or activity, whether the alteration or activity by the farm will or will not result in significant impacts on erosion and or deposition processes along the shore and in the tidal waters of Potter Pond?
At this small scale development, I don't understand how the farm could impact soil erosion or deposition.
Okay. And finally, based on your review of the applications and your expertise, what, if any, impact will this farm have on Potter Pond?
Looking at other farms in this region, it's possible to see localized positive benefits, actually, such as an enhanced water clarity, nutrient cycling. Farms provide structure and habitat, biodiversity, but I do not anticipate any pond-wide impacts or harm to the ecosystem of Potter Pond with this proposal. Mr. Raso's lease proposal is well below the 5% rule and an order of magnitude below the calculated ecological carrying capacity for this pond.
Okay. Madam Chair, if I just might have a moment.
Yes.
All right. I have no further questions for Dr. Byron.
Do the subcommittee members have any questions for Dr. Byron? Mr. Gomez.
Just I think somewhere in all you said, you've answered my question, but it's a bad day for me when I can't learn something. So I have a question relative to is there any difference in impact if a farm has a mixture of scallops and oysters, or do they pretty much work together the same? This farm is proposed half scallop bottom and then half oysters. And we're getting more and more of that. And their interaction seems to me be fine, but it's not my professional expertise. So if you had a comment, I'd be very interested.
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't expect any of my answers to change based on whether this would have been all oysters or half oysters, half scallops. They're all filter feeders. They're all taking plankton and particles out of the water and improving that water quality. And yeah, so I don't see any, I mean, if anything, you're introducing or you're reducing the monoculture, right? It's always better. Polyculture is always better for the environment, multiple species.
Yeah. Same with the land.
Exactly.
It does seem to impact, in this case, the social carrying capacity, and that the scallops are bottom, whereas the oysters would be in bags near the surface. Thank you for your answer.
You're welcome.
Any other questions from subcommittee members?
Madam Chair, I have a question.
Okay, and I think we lost your video, Ms. Reynolds.
I'm not sure what that's about, but I've been having some issues today. I just wanted to ask Dr. Byron, when you talk about there's no negative, or in fact it's helping the environment, this is sort of localized to the farm itself. Do you factor in, the fact that there's going to be additional boating on the pond, additional discharge from the engines and air pollution, so that there's sort of a net positive effect? Or are you just looking at exactly what happens in the pond itself without the human impact that's part of it?
Boat, motor oil, gasoline, that is not part of the model. That anthropogenic pollution was not part of the food web model. So that's not considered in any of these calculations.
Okay,
guess I'll
thank you.
stop there. Yeah, you're welcome.
Mhm.
Oh, Mr. Murray, go ahead.
Thank you. You mentioned social carrying capacity, and I guess just in passing, that would seem to me to be a much more difficult carrying capacity to quantify versus the more science-based carrying capacity of the shellfish and ecosystem. And a lot of the conversation yesterday maybe was geared towards social carrying capacity versus ecological carrying capacity.
Is there a question?
Well, you're not testifying as to social carrying capacity, correct?
No, I'm not testifying as to social carrying capacity, but I'm happy to
But
share a
you-
few
I
thoughts on
mean-
that if you want.
Sure, but I mean, you brought it up as one of, among carrying capacity features that social is a particular aspect of it.
It
And
is.
that was it, yeah, so. But if you'd like
And
to elaborate, then please do.
well,
Madam Chair?
I'm happy.
I would object to this witness giving any testimony about social carrying costs, despite the fact that we all want to hear about it. This witness is not qualified to give that opinion. So I asked, with respect to the board, I asked that she be limited to testimony about her expertise.
Well, actually, I would disagree that she is not qualified to speak about it. I think she is qualified to speak about it. What she testified, and she testified about the 4 types of them, so she's aware of them. We focused her testimony on ecological, but she certainly is familiar and able to testify from her
There's
background.
been no foundation for any testimony about social carrying costs.
That wasn't
Madam
your
Chair-
first objection, Mr. Wagner.
Yeah,
Madam Chair, I was about to ask that question. Is the objection based upon foundation?
Yes.
It's a different
Okay.
objection.
That's a different objection, but it's one that's cured by laying the foundation.
If she can lay the foundation.
If she can, but Beth hasn't had a chance to do that yet, so.
I thought the testimony was over.
Well, here's the way that I look at it. There's a panel, and one of the members of the panel asked a question. And I think that panel member should be allowed to have an answer to that question. If the objection is a foundation, then I say let Ms. Noonan lay that foundation so the member who's going to be making a vote on this can be satisfied for what he did. I'm going to make this a statement and make a recommendation to the board. Because this is an administrative panel, I don't want it to be that information that Mr. Murray is seeking is limited because we're going on legal technicalities. It's different than a question from legal counsel. This is actually a member of the panel who's going to have to vote on this, who has a question based upon testimony that Ms. Byron has already gave. I think he's entitled to an answer. So if the objection is no foundation, that's easily cured and we can move along with this. But I do think Mr. Murray should get an answer to the question that he's interposed.
Would you like me to go or just have her answer the question?
Do you mind laying the foundation?
No problem at all. Ms. Byron, Mr. Murray, who's a member of this panel, asked you a question about social capacity. You heard that question, correct?
I did.
And you previously, in your testimony, defined that term when you testified, right?
I did define social carrying capacity, yes.
Right. And based in your experience and background, have you worked with the issues of social capacity?
I have, actually. I'm also published in the area of social carrying capacity. I work very closely with social scientists, and together, me as an ecologist and them as social scientists have published multiple times on the topic of social carrying capacity.
I tender the witness, and I think she's ready to answer that question if you remember what it is.
I believe Mr. Murray was curious just to hear me share some of my thoughts about social carrying capacity and how they relate to Mr. Raso's proposal and the testimony. Am I correct?
I think he's saying yes.
Yes. I see the head nodding.
The mute's on, so go ahead. Go ahead, Dr. Byron. Thank you.
I agree with Mr. Murray's statement that when we have a situation such as this, there's multiple users of an area of these salt ponds. They all have different interests and need, different parts of that system for different uses. One way to resolve that would be to examine the social carrying capacity. I'd like to mention some of the work done by Dr. Tracy Dalton at URI, who attempted to capture quantitatively a measure of social carrying capacity for Rhode Island waters. Her method was to present photographs to a variety of different users, stakeholders of these systems. In the photographs, they showed different amounts and configurations of buoys and aquaculture gear in the water. And she asked respondents to rate on a Likert scale, on a scale of 1 to 5, for example, how accepting they were of these different aquaculture configurations and levels of development. What she found from her work is there was, I think, much to her surprise and my surprise, that there was actually a higher level of acceptance for aquaculture than we were expecting to find, again, from multiple different users. And so that's just an example of one way to capture a measure of carrying capacity in one area of social carrying capacity. It really, you could take a market analysis and look at the economies. You could really examine it from multiple different disciplines and perspectives in the social sciences. If I may just expound a little bit more and perhaps present a very contrasting situation to help maybe explain the situation here. If we were to examine social carrying capacity in the northeast of US, and then we would compare that to somewhere in the other half of this world, say China, there's very different human values at play there. China is very interested in food security and food production. We're very privileged on the east coast of the US to have a beautiful watershed and different values there. It's not just about food production, it's also about recreation and other things. And so I'd expect that the social carrying capacity would be much different in these two different geographies based on human values and human needs alone. So all of this is to say it is very complicated, and it very much depends on your question at hand and how you want to address it. But I'll end by going back to the 5% rule that's on the books was intended when it was first calculated to be, it was intended to be an ecological carrying capacity. Whether over time that has shifted to a social carrying capacity, I think is a matter of debate.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Byron. Jen, you're on mute. Sorry.
Sorry. I have my mouse for my computer, and then I have my mouse for my laptop, so that wasn't helpful. Dr. Byron, I have a couple of questions for you. Continuing on the social carrying capacity, I'm just trying to relate it, if it relates to the criteria that you look at for category B ascents. And so, you had talked about the ecological impact, and that's definitely covered. There's one of the criteria is to demonstrate that measures have been taken to minimize adverse scenic impact. Is scenic impact part of that social carrying capacity? Is that what you're talking about in part?
It could be.
Okay.
Yes, and that's certainly the angle that Tracy Dalton took, was that view shed.
Okay. And it's subjective depending on the area that you're looking at.
Right, the people and the place, yes.
Okay. Question for you on ecological impact. I know that your opinion relates to the impact on the pond as a whole, so Potter Pond. And council talked a little bit about the cove, Seagar Cove, and you said you considered them kind of one and the same. There's flushing between the two. Is the ecology and the ecosystem the same throughout the pond, including the cove? Does the cove have a separate ecological system? How do you view that?
Yeah, I would not be comfortable trying to chop up Potter Pond, which is already a small water body, into smaller sections to try to describe the ecology. I really think we need to look at a basin-wide scale here for the matter of this conversation.
Thank you. Those are all the questions that I have. I think unless we have others from subcommittee members, I will turn it over to council for the objectors. Maybe starting with you, Mr. Capizza.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So Dr. Byron, basically, and that was a very good presentation, but basically what you're saying is ecologically, this is not going to impact the pond, right? It's going to work from an ecological.
It's going to work. There'll be no harm to the ecology of the pond from this proposal.
And I just want to make sure I understand this 5% rule. I believe you testified that goes to the carrying capacity in each pond, which goes to the maximum amount of shellfish aquaculture that can occur in a given water body without unacceptable ecological impact to that body of water. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And so that 5% rule only applies to ecological impact. I think you said it was debatable as to whether that applies to the social impact. Is that correct?
It applies, right. The intention of calculating that 5% rule was to capture the ecological carrying capacity.
Not the social.
Not the social.
Thank you. And when we're talking about social impact, I just want to make clear that's those who use the cove for recreation, correct?
Recreationalists would be one user of the pond. There's multiple users.
Okay. What other multiple users use Seagar Cove?
I'm going to object. I don't know how far we want to go down on individuals. And then she also indicated it's Potter Pond, not just Seagar Cove. She looks at it on a basin-wide analysis.
I'll rephrase the question. What types of recreational activity take place on Potter Pond?
I'm sorry, that's outside that's not where I'm here to testify today. It's outside my expertise.
But you were testifying about the social carrying capacity. We went down that road, and you just testified about that the social impact would be impacted by recreational activity, correct?
Can I stop one moment? I think her testimony went to ecological carrying capacity. She did respond to a question from Mr. Murray on social carrying capacity, which I think was proper to respond to a committee member's question, and she has that expertise. I don't want to go down that far past. She's not a sociologist by training, I believe. You can correct me, Dr. Byron.
Madam Chair, actually on this, I think Mr. Capizzo's question is appropriate. Witness might not be able to answer, but he's got a specific question. And I think it should be answered here.
Yeah, I think we went down the road, so to speak. So, to the extent that Dr. Byron can answer it, I think it's okay.
Mr. Capizzo, please repeat your question.
Sure. What types of recreation impact social capacity on Potter Pond, if you know?
What types of recreation specifically impact social,
The social carrying
the
capacity.
social carrying capacity. And you want that answer specific to Powder Pond or more just in general?
If you're familiar with Potter Pond and you can testify to that, great. If not, then just give me what recreational impact, what types of recreation, excuse me, have an impact on the social carrying capacity.
Again, to answer what is impacting social carrying capacity really depends on what your metrics are and what perspective you want to take with us.
You testified that there's.
I can.
What, could she finish her answer, please, Christian?
I can speculate as to types that could potentially, but they will not be specific to Potter Pond. And so I think anybody who is on a water body, regardless of whether it's recreation or not, is a user of that water body and therefore included in a consideration, or could be included in a consideration for social carrying capacity. I do not recreate on Potter Pond and cannot tell you exactly what types of recreation occur on Potter Pond.
Okay. Would you agree with the statement that social carrying capacity really determines how much aquaculture we can put in a location?
I think that's one factor to determine, to help determine how much carrying capacity, or how much aquaculture can be in an area. And that is, to my knowledge, not how the regulations and rules are written in the state of Rhode Island.
Would you agree with this statement that it's far less than ecological or the production carrying capacity, that social carrying capacity as it relates to location?
Mr. Capizzo, that is a great question. That is one that I am very interested in exploring in an academic setting, and it is highly dependent and relevant on the geography. It's my thesis in the Northeast of US that yes, often social carrying capacity is the most limiting below ecological carrying capacity, which would not be the case in a place like China that I just described.
Okay, if I may have one moment, Madam Chair.
Yes.
Thank you. I don't have any other questions. Thank you, Dr. Byron.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Capizzo. Mr. Wagner.
Good afternoon, Dr. Byron. I just have maybe 3 or 4 questions. You testified that you reviewed an opposition package in order to prepare for your testimony, right?
I did.
Did that include the 147 letters opposing the project?
I did not read 147 letters.
Did you read some of the opposition letters?
I'm aware of some of the points of opposition.
Okay, what was the opposition package you referred to? I'm just trying to determine what that was that you reviewed.
I'm sorry, I'm really at a loss at how else to describe it. May I ask Beth Noonan to help me describe the opposition package?
No.
That is that.
I'll talk to you later. Go ahead.
All right. I just have one question about the social carrying capacity. Doesn't the social carrying capacity depend on whether we're talking about bottom culture or floating gear? Doesn't that make a big difference?
If one of the things being considered in social carrying capacity is view shed, then what is visible and what is not visible would make a difference. And so I'm assuming that's where you're trying to go with this question of submerged versus floating gear.
Well, also some aquaculture doesn't obstruct other users at all, right?
It depends on the technique. You're right.
I have no other questions. Thank you.
May I go back?
Yes, on redirect.
Thank you. Dr. Byron, just a few questions. Ms. Reynolds had asked you about whether or not things like air pollution, gasoline and oil from recreational vehicles, motor oil, were factored into your model. Can you just explain why they were not?
It's a different type of modeling. The food web model was really focused on the species, the animals, the algae, the other organisms, living organisms in the pond, and it was really intended to capture, like I said, the energy flows and predator-prey relationships. One model does not do everything. That would require a different tool to look at pollution and those impacts. And for the purpose of this study, or I should just maybe back up, and for any study, you do the best that you can to match the tool for the question. And so in this case, we determined that a food web model was the best tool for this question, not a pollution model.
As to the questions that we got into about the social carrying capacity, and your experience with it, do you believe, or do you have an understanding of whether or not the science behind social carrying capacity is settled?
Oh, it's very much not settled. If anything, it's of the 4 types of carrying capacity for aquaculture I defined, this one, the social carrying capacity, is probably least well understood, most flexible, incorporates the most diversity in disciplines and perspectives. And so it's really, yeah, there's no one method or one answer here. It's highly subjective to the question at hand, the geography, and then the values of the humans of that system.
In terms of the question that Mr. Wagner asked you about the materials that you reviewed, was it fair to say that those were documents from Mr. Capizzo on behalf of his clients? Does that refresh your recollection?
Yes, that was part of the package.
Okay. And finally, again, in terms of the numbers that we've been talking about, if in the 5% rule, that, in your opinion, I think you've told us, is just well below the 46% ecological carrying capacity that you had calculated. Is that correct?
Correct.
Nothing further, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Okay, I think we're going to move on then to your 4th witness. And after we finish the 4th witness with everyone's questions and your redirect, then I'd like to take a break.
Sure. Dr. Byron, thank you very much. And if you could pull up Dr. Rice now, and I'm going to tender him over to Leslie Parker.
And Mr. Moore, while you're pulling up Dr. Rice, if you could also pull up Exhibit 2, and I know there are multiple copies, so it will be the Michael Rice CV. Dr. Rice, can you turn your video on, and are you there?
Okay, I'm here. Oh, I'll start video. Here we go. Okay. All right.
Could we?
Yep.
We could go ahead and swear the witness.
I can't see him, but would you raise your right hand, please?
I can't see Dr. Rice either. Do you want to?
Dr. Rice, just say something and you'll pop up in the screen.
Hello, hello, this is Mike Rice.
I don't see him.
I still don't see him.
Mr.
Hello?
Moore, do you
I
want to
can see
stop
him.
sharing? Yeah, do you want to stop sharing the screen for a minute, and then I think we'll be able to see him.
Hello,
There he is. Okay.
hello,
Okay.
I'm right here.
We see you.
Would you raise your right hand, please? Do solemnly swear the testimony that you are about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth to help you God?
I do.
Would you state your name for the record, please?
Michael Rice.
Thank you.
And Mr. Moore, we can share that screen again when you're ready. Thank you. Dr. Rice, how are you today?
Quite well.
Dr. Rice, could you give us an overview of your educational background?
Okay, yes, I hold degrees from University of San Francisco, bachelor's in biology, and a master's and PhD degrees from the University of California.
And Dr. Rice, applicant's exhibit 2 is on the screen. Is that a copy of your CV?
Yes, this is, and in summary, it covers my area of teaching, research, extension, and professional engagement. Some of the key areas that that would be relevant for these hearings is I teach the shellfish aquaculture courses at the University of Rhode Island for undergraduates. I've had various graduate students, both supervising as a major professor and on the committees. These include Perry Raso himself, Dr. Byron on her committee, and major professor of Dr. Rowe, who will be following. I've conducted research, some of the most relevant research to these proceedings. Dr. Byron mentioned studies in tanks. Some of the carrying capacity estimates based by tank studies were done by my students in papers that I have co-authored. And those show some results that are similar to Dr. Byron's modeling studies. The second is in aquaculture extension, both locally and internationally. I've received national awards from the Republic of the Philippines and in Indonesia for my work there. And here in Rhode Island, also of bearing to this is that I was on the drafting team for the current aquaculture legislation that set forth CRMC as the lead agency for aquaculture permitting under Chapter 2010. These people were the major authors, former Representative Eileen Naughton, and Legislative Council Attorney Amy Casilla, and myself. So we were the major people, major reasons of the current iteration of the laws. So this is the sort of the overview.
Thank you, Dr. Rice. And could you give us what is your current position?
My current position is Professor of Fisheries and Aquaculture at the University of Rhode Island.
And Madam Chair, I would ask that Dr. Rice be qualified as an expert on aquaculture as a professor of fisheries and aquaculture.
Be qualified as a professor of fisheries and aquaculture or an expert in
aquaculture.
Okay. Okay. So I'll take up a motion to so qualify Dr. Rice. Any subcommittee member? Mr. Gomez.
Madam Chair, I will make the motion to qualify Dr. Rice as as a expert witness.
In
Yeah.
aquaculture
I'll
and
second that.
I'm sorry, in agriculture, yes.
Madam Chair, before the vote, it may be appropriate to see if any of the lawyers object to Dr. Rice being qualified as an expert
No
in
objection.
aquaculture.
No objection here.
No objection.
Okay, thank you. Right, back to Mr. Gomez's motion. Is there a second?
Reynolds will second that.
Thank you, Ms. Reynolds. Any discussion? Okay, I'll do a roll call. Ray Koya,
Ray Coy votes aye.
Patricia Reynolds,
Reynolds votes aye.
John Gomez,
John Gomez, aye.
Vin Murray,
Murray, aye.
and myself, Jennifer Cervenka, aye. The motion to qualify carries.
And Madam Chair, I would also ask that Dr. Rice's CV, which is Exhibit 2, be entered in full.
Yes, that can be admitted in full, unless there's objection.
No objection.
No objection.
Dr. Rice, you were retained by Perry Raso as an expert in this matter. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Do you know Mr. Raso?
Yes, I do. And I've known him for a good long while, going back to the early 2000s. He first began studying shellfish aquaculture in the introductory aquaculture class here at the University of Rhode Island.
And Dr. Rice, do you serve on the Marine Fisheries Council?
I do. I am a member of the Fisheries Council. According to section 20-3-1, which specifies the membership of the Marine Fisheries Council, is that there are 2 positions that are reserved for members of the scientific and marine sciences to help guide the council.
And did you consider Mr. Raso's application as part of that council?
Yes, we did. And it was very unusual that we did as a full council. Normal procedures of the Marine Fisheries Council is that the subcommittee on shellfish considers all of the aquaculture applications unless it gets contentious, and any member of the subcommittee can petition that it goes to the full council. So the only reason I got to see it as a Fisheries Council member was because of the contentious nature and it being raised to the full council.
And did you have any idea at that time that you would be providing testimony for Mr. Raso on the application?
No, I did not. In fact, I was rather surprised that it even came to the full Marine Fisheries Council, and I'm sort of surprised that we're here again in that this sort of thing has come up in the past about every 10 years or so. But this it's now back on cycle.
Did Mr. Raso discuss his application with you before the Marine Fisheries Council meeting?
No, in fact, he never discussed this up until this period for this hearing for the Maine Coastal Council.
And other than your discussions at the Marine Fisheries Council, before you were engaged as an expert, did you have any other knowledge of this application?
No, I quite frankly didn't know that it even existed before it came to the Marine Fisheries Council.
And did your involvement at the Marine Fisheries Council impact your testimony here today in any way?
No, my role on the Marine Fisheries Council is largely scientific. I am not sort of representing recreational or commercial fisheries. It's largely the fisheries resources that I'm speaking to, and that will not affect any testimony on these proceedings.
Dr. Rice, are you familiar with the South Kingstown Conservation Commission?
Yes, I am. I am very familiar with the South Kingstown Conservation Commission. I served for a total of 18 years on the South Kingstown Conservation Commission, and 10 years as chairing of that commission. Largely as authorized under general laws of Rhode Island, section 4535-1, which is the authorizing legislation for the conservation councils. They are largely advisory to the town boards and the like. And much of the credibility of the conservation commissions rests in the sort of the quality and let us say reputation that they built up of. I am very proud that during my tenure on the Conservation Commission in South Kingstown, there were 3 major initiatives that were adopted by the town. One was septic system ordinances, particularly in the pond areas to protect the water quality. Number 2, a major tree ordinance. And number 3, the setting up and discussion of the aquaculture in South Kingstown waters, of which Dr. Rowe, who will follow with me, had the first one in these local waters. So during my time on the commission, these major issues came up.
And in your experience, does the Conservation Commission give notice to an aquaculture applicant of its meeting on an application?
Yes, this is very much the standard procedures, at least when I was up there. This would be in keeping with sort of good practices, but quite frankly, it would be the type of thing that would be required by Administrative Procedures Act.
And do you know whether Mr. Raso received any notice from the South Kingstown Conservation Commission on the consideration of his application?
I would believe that would be hearsay because I do not know directly by myself. Dr. Perry Raso answered that question yesterday.
And did you hear Mr. Raso's answer yesterday?
Yes, I did. And his answer was that he was not noticed.
And is the lack of notice to an applicant regarding the South Kingstown Conservation Commission's consideration of their application standard procedure?
That is not standard procedure as far as I know. It may be now, but certainly was not when I was chair of the commission.
Dr. Rice, are you familiar with Mr. Raso's application?
Yes, I am. I have read his application, and I have read the supplements in terms of the initial applied for lease area and the modified ones as well.
Are you familiar with the location of the proposed aquaculture farm?
I am very familiar, yes.
And have you visited the location where the proposed aquaculture farm will be?
Yes, I have. We took out the little skiff. I didn't get the big boat.
And have you been present were you present for the testimony yesterday?
Yes, I was. Very much like Dr. Byron, from beginning to end.
And have you been present today for Dr. Byron's testimony?
I wouldn't miss it. Dr. Byron is a star.
And did you have an opportunity to review the staff report that is Exhibit 17 for the applicant?
Yes, I have. The staff report primarily authored by Mr. Butel.
Did you review any other materials in preparation for your testimony today?
Yes, there was several things. I got on the Rhode Island General Assembly website to check out the various authorizing statutes that might possibly come up in my testimony, and I reviewed the letters of objections. I reviewed the packet of the ESS group and some of the potential court cases that might come up in terms of discussion.
And Dr. Rice, are you familiar with the history of aquaculture in Rhode Island?
Yes, I am. On the CRMC website, the aquaculture coordinator maintains a website, and on that website, in the 2006 annual report, I've published a detailed history of shellfish aquaculture going back to prior to the 1844 initial aquaculture or Oyster Act, and reviewing the sort of the history of aquaculture within Rhode Island. So that has a lot of major review of court cases and legislation.
And based on your familiarity with the history of aquaculture in Rhode Island, how has Rhode Island balanced public access to the water and aquaculture?
Let's see. The responsibilities of the CRMC have been set forth in Chapter 2010 and set as the lead agency. In fact, the Office of the Aquaculture Coordinator, Mr. Butel and now Mr. Getch, is in fact one of the few statutory state positions within the state government, and is set forth with responsibility in terms of their report to take and balance the needs of the people of the state of Rhode Island in relationship to their coastal resources. And this is very much in keeping with the Supreme Court case that I mentioned, Martin v. Leslie of Waddell, Supreme Court of the Taney Courts in 1842. And this is in terms of the state has responsibility to the public trust. The procedures in set up for aquaculture in Chapter 2010 follow this, and the procedures set up by the Coastal Marine Coastal Council, including these this Zoom hearing, is all part of this balancing act, and begins with the preliminary determination that was put in as part of the legislation the legislation that enabled this. So this is completely considering and balancing the needs of the public and aquaculture.
And Dr. Rice, are you familiar with CRMC's Category B requirements?
Yes.
And based on your experience and the review of materials in this case, do you have an opinion as to whether or not Mr. Raso has demonstrated a need for the proposed oyster and scallop farm?
Yes, he has. In conformity to a sort of agreed upon use, which we've talked about, this so-called 5%. This is sort of an agreed upon sort of agreement, and that came about during Dr. Byron's PhD dissertation time, in which there was a good deal of controversy, and the fishing community and members that were of the public that were agreeing with this found that at the time to be quite reasonable. Now it could come up for renegotiation, reconsideration, or something of that sort, but that's where we are right now.
And Dr. Rice, based on your experience and review of the materials, do you have an opinion as to whether shellfish aquaculture, the shellfish aquaculture proposed by Mr. Raso, will have an effect on erosion, or will have an effect upon erosion on the shore?
Yes, I do. I have an opinion on that. And given the location and the like, there should be no major effect on changing of currents or anything of the sort that might increase scouring, erosion, turbidity. There's no sort of nothing's going on in the intertidal zone that would change anything. There's no reason to believe that there would be any erosion or turbidity increase. In fact, the fact that these shellfish, both scallops and oysters, are filter feeders, and they are removing phytoplankton from the water, just the converse is probably more close to the truth, that it is more likely to improve the water quality.
And Dr. Rice, based on your experience and review of the materials, do you have an opinion as to whether the aquaculture farm will result in significant impacts on plant and animal diversity and abundance?
Okay, this is largely goes to the testimony of Dr. Byron. Her work on ecosystems modeling is recognized globally as a gold standard in this area, and her conclusions were no. My tank studies, which she mentioned, were basically set up so that the amount of oysters in the tanks in terms of the biomass were modeling what the biomass of oysters were at the turn of the 20th century. And at that level, which is something like 500 times the level that they are now in Rhode Island waters, were not at carrying capacity yet. So Mr. Raso's little 3 acres is not going to affect things very much.
And previously we discussed the balance between aquaculture and public access, right?
Yes.
And are you familiar with the arguments that are set forth by the objectors in their filings?
Yes, I am, and I believe that most of the objections could be dealt with largely by design aspects. I think a lot of the sort of citing discussions from yesterday could be taken into account, and I believe that most objections could be dealt with.
So do you have an opinion based on your experience and review of the materials as to whether the proposed farm would result in significant conflicts with water dependent uses and activities such as recreational boating, fishing, swimming, and navigation?
Okay, this was there an objection?
Yeah, I think it's beyond the scope of his expertise, and there's no foundation for him to give an opinion on that.
I would disagree. He's testified about the balance, but his experience with the balance of public access to the water and aquaculture, and he testified that he was one of the drafters of the legislation and is familiar with the history in Rhode Island of balancing public access to the water and aquaculture.
Madam Chair, from what I've heard and based on Dr. Race's testimony, I think he's able to answer the question without further foundational questions.
I agree with that.
Proceed.
Leslie, now I forgot the question.
Yeah, no problem. Dr. Rice, do you have an opinion based on your experience and review of the materials and review of the site as to whether the proposed farm would result in significant conflicts with water dependent uses and activities such as recreational activities, including boating, fishing, swimming, and navigation?
Objection for the record.
Okay, well, it has to do with sort of the semantics of the word significant. And I take it that this use of the word significant would be large, humongous, sort of outlandish. My answer to that is absolutely not. The applicant Perry Raso has gone through great pains to be as accommodating as he possibly can. And this is sort of evidenced by starting off with one configuration of the farm, trying to work with some objectors, changing it, and coming up with the various polygons and as being as accommodating as possible. I believe that this body, if sort of given all of the data presented here, could essentially come up with a solution to satisfy most all people and interests in the pond.
And Dr. Rice, based on your review of the application, the site, and your expertise, do you believe this application provides the balance of aquaculture and public access sought by CRMC in that and set forth in that legislation?
Objection for the record.
I do.
I have no further questions.
Any questions from subcommittee members for Dr. Rice? Okay, I don't have any. I don't think anyone else has questions, so we'll turn it over to Mr. Capizzo.
Madam Chair, may I have a moment to just get my note? I'm just reviewing my notes. I'll defer to Mr. Wagner and then if you come back to me. Thank you.
Mr. Wagner, would you like to go?
I might have a couple of questions. Doctor, you testified that in your opinion, Mr. Raso satisfies the first requirement of a category B ascent, the requirement that he demonstrate need for the proposal based upon satisfying the 5% rule. Is that correct?
Well, the 5% rule is sort of a guideline that has been adopted by CRMC for these water bodies. So he is his application is not exceeding that. So He is expanding his operations to include scallops. Scallops need deeper water. The site is deeper than where his current sites are, and more appropriate for the scallops. So if he wants to expand operations, this makes perfect sense to me in terms of a need.
How does satisfying the 5% rule demonstrate a need for the proposal? We agree that he satisfies the 5% rule. I'm trying to understand how your opinion could be that he demonstrates a need for the proposal based upon satisfying the 5% rule.
Well,
I'm gonna object. He gave his opinion and the basis for it. I think it's asked and answered.
Yes, I mean, he needs an area. He needs an area for deeper water to basically further his business interests. I mean, that's about as simple as it gets.
The need for a deeper water has nothing to do with the 5% rule, right?
No.
Okay.
It's that and it has nothing to do with the 5% rule. The 5% rule is a guideline in terms of total water surface area in the water. Well, what you're asking and what the assent the assent is goes to sort of need for it. I mean, it isn't capricious and arbitrary. He has a business need to basically expand his species under cultivation, and that requires deeper waters.
Well, how do you know he has a business need to expand? How is that, and how is that related to the 5% rule? I just don't understand. Maybe I'm misunderstanding your testimony.
Objection again. I think that was 3 questions in one. So if we can ask one question at a time.
As I understand it, the question is whether or not this expert believes that the need criterion of a category B assent is satisfied by the 5% rule. He's asking how you tie those two together, and I think that's a fair question. And maybe they're not tied together.
They're not tied together. The 5% rule is basically a guideline that was set forth and adopted by CRMC some 11 or 12 years ago as a means to provide some sort of criterion or yardstick to measure aquaculture expansion up to. Basically, in terms of need, that's a different issue.
Well, Madam Chair, if I may, it seems to me that Mr. Wagner's real question, and I'm not putting words in his mouth, are whether or not there's been a demonstration that the need is on an economic basis. And that is separate from the 5% rule. Is that correct, Mr.
Yes.
Wagner?
Yeah, that was part of my question.
Okay. So
Yeah.
the questions have been segmented out. I do think that's an appropriate question to ask on cross-examination, Madam Chair.
Yeah, I'm fine with the line of questions. I think I don't know if they're understanding one another, but I'm fine with the line of questions.
Yeah, I guess I'm not following,
Okay,
because
I'm sorry, Doctor. Maybe I misunderstood your testimony. I thought that you testified that, in your opinion, Mr. Raso has satisfied the first requirement of a category B assent, which is to demonstrate need for the proposed activity or alteration. I thought you testified that he satisfied that because he satisfied the 5% rule. And I thought that was your testimony. If it wasn't your testimony, I apologize. What I'd like to ask you then is, I think you testified that he did satisfy that first criterion. Could you tell me every basis you have for that opinion that he satisfied the first criterion?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, it's about as simple as can be. Right on the first level, the area that he's applying for, if granted, will fall below the 5%.
Thank you. Is that all? Are there any other reasons why you think that he satisfied the criteria of need, Doctor?
No.
Thank you. I think you also testified that Mr. Raso has been as accommodating as possible. Is that correct?
That's that would be my opinion on reading these things.
Well, wouldn't reducing the size of the lease area be an accommodation that he has not agreed to do?
That would be true. He's basically going for 3 acres, and that could be discussed with him. But we are here on the 3 acres.
And 3 acres is the maximum amount he could apply for, isn't that right?
Correct.
Now, you sat on the Marine Fisheries Council, right?
Yes, still do.
For this vote, you voted for the project.
Yes, I did.
And the vote was 3-3 tied.
Yes,
right? So
correct.
the recommendation was not to recommend approval, or it was a tie, so there was no.
There was no recommendation.
I think that's all I have. Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you.
Okay, back to Mr. Capizzo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dr. Rice, you heard the questions that I asked Dr. Byron about the 5% rules. You heard the earlier testimony?
Yes.
And so I just want to make sure I, again, understand it correctly, that 5% rule is for the carrying capacity in each pond, that the maximum amount of shellfish aquaculture can occur in a given water body without unacceptable ecological impact of that body of water. Is that correct?
Yes, that was the original intent. You will be hearing from Dr. Rowe following me. He was the one that did the calculation. You can ask him directly, but it was based on some earlier work that was done by mussel aquaculturists in New Zealand. And the waters in New Zealand are different than our coastal ponds. Dr. Byron's work, as we have heard, and I have read her papers extensively, show that in actuality, the ecological carrying capacity for aquaculture is much higher in Rhode Island waters, and in fact, approaching what the actual aquaculture production was at the turn of the 20th century, around 1910. We're far below that level now.
So the 5% rule only applies to the carrying capacity, not the social carrying capacity, correct?
That is correct. And as
the only question. Thank you.
Let him, Mr. Capizzo, please let him finish his answer.
That is correct. This was a first level estimate of ecological carrying capacity when we were going into this. Subsequently, the science has shown that the ecological carrying capacity is actually much higher. We could actually have something like 500 times as much oysters being produced in our coastal waters and still not reach ecological carrying capacity. So what this has become is largely a set of guidelines by CRMC for permitting purposes, just a sort of a guidelines. That you are correct. I mean, that was how it was determined.
Would you agree with the statement that the social carrying capacity really determines how much aquaculture we can put in a location?
I unqualifiedly say yes. That is absolutely true. I also agree with Dr. Byron's assessment that that is a very tough thing to determine, and that is the reason why we have the CRMC process.
Okay, so you testified about this CRMC process, and I think you had cited a statute. I thought it was 2010-5. That you're familiar with that statute?
Let's see, 2010-5. Yeah, that's part of the chapter. That's chapter 2010. Yes.
For Rhode Island general laws.
Yes.
You testified that you were surprised as your role as Rhode Island on the Rhode Island